I tell people it was like I found my tribe. They were very dedicated. They were very solution oriented and they were also very fun. Like they had great senses of humor, cleaning toilets and laughing. Uh,
You don't see that too often.
exactly.
Hi, Victoria Ali here with Everyone Counts Out World. I'm here with Kirstin Copeland, who is a fairly recent person in retirement. And what we're going to do is go through her experience and take a look at what worked, what didn't work, and maybe get some tips on how to unlock retirement happiness. Kirstin, if you want to give just like a little intro of yourself, a little background of what was your career, and then we can take it from there.
Sure. Thanks. I had a dream career, I think by at least my standards anyway. I became a park ranger in the late 90s and got paid to be outside.
When you started your dream job, which is your original job, that sounds like it was really perfect for you. And frankly, who wouldn't have fun snowmobiling and being outside a
Exactly.
lot for a living? But in that case, did you have a plan before you got into that?
My plan in college was to do international relations, to apply with the State Department. I took French. I was going to work in Western Europe. And then my college job, which was an outside kind of public safety, law enforcement type job, I realized I really enjoyed a lot of it. And people like you and other people who had my best interests at heart said, "You seem happiest when you're outside." Another weird fluke that seemed to just lend itself to it was I was looking through the requirements for another degree, and I was only two classes away from having that as a double major. And I hadn't even tried. I didn't even know that degree existed. That was a major. And so it just seemed like it was meant to be, quote unquote, that I would add environmental conservation to my double major and then international affairs, and then started looking for and applying and doing a lot of research about what would it be like to work for a county parks and rec department versus the state parks department versus the national parks. And I really got to try a lot of that. I did ride alongs and volunteer work and even an internship with the Nature Conservancy and things like that. And it definitely was important because when I did my ride along with the state park rangers, I tell people it was like I found my tribe. They were very dedicated. They were very solution oriented and they were also very fun. Like they had great senses of humor, cleaning toilets and laughing.
You
Uh,
don't see that too often.
exactly. And got paid to be outside and be with the public and get to be on boats and snowmobiles and four wheelers. And ultimately got into a level where I got to lead a team that was at a park and got to provide natural resource protection and recreation, and it was absolutely a perfect fit for me. I love teams coming together, the diverse talents and everything, and then solving problems and exceeding expectations. I got to do that for almost 25 years. And that was where I was at when I got into retirement. And I actually got into retirement because my husband made that leap first. He
Ah.
was a state trooper and was transitioning into a new job at a local police department. And I thought, you know what, let's do it together. It'll be good as a couple to kind of transition. And it also gave me 1 year with my youngest kid still at home that I could soak up some of that time. So it was a great theory going into it. And I had a plan. I called it my 3 leg stool plan. And I still think it was a great plan, but it turns out none of it ended up working out, quote unquote. So I think I'm a good poster child for all the best laid plans can change and what it is like to adjust those expectations as you go. We merged with another agency that changed the culture a little bit. But for the majority of my career, and certainly at the location that I got to work at, which by the way also was probably the most beautiful park in a
Oh,
state park in Colorado,
wow.
it was like dreamy. It was just such a great thing and really enjoyed supporting great staff and team members that were all about the mission. They were all about providing safe, enjoyable recreation. They were all about protecting the resources that we were there in charge of. And so it was just so easy. All I really did was advocate for resources and support their great thinking and decision making. And it was just a phenomenal experience. But yeah, that all came about very happenstance, as you just indicated. And my plan going into college also was very different than what my actual outcome ended up being.
And that's great to hear the feet on the ground experience because not everybody finds their dream career, which is most of the time you spend out there working is in those years. And it sounds like that although you didn't have that exact plan towards maybe the end of your education, you actually started picking up the breadcrumbs you were receiving as far as, wait a minute, I do like working outside. And then you did these ride alongs and you got more clarity, and so this is something that I did myself too. It's amazing. So it does show that although it was kind of happenstance as far as your whole plan in college, you really did once you got into it and interested, you got the facts. And you really went out there and you said, who's the best place to work for? And in fact, it sounds like you ended up with one of those dream careers that few of us really do encounter. And so then coming out of that, and I think it's really romantic that you and your husband decided to retire at the same time. It's pretty cool. And that you're young enough that you can be thinking of these second careers. Very cool. So tell me what happened about your three legged stool. Let's go back to that now with your plan that you had for retirement called your three legged stool.
The three legged stool had three pieces that I identified before I ever left my full time job. And one was I wanted to work with a cadaver dog, which a cadaver dog or human remains dog is a dog that's specially trained to locate persons who are not there to be rescued, but to be recovered for the closure of the
Mm.
family. There were three times as a park ranger that we went and helped with searches, and three of those times it was ultimately resolved by one of these specially trained dogs. And I thought, what a great thing to help provide a family closure. And I love dogs. I've had dogs my entire life. And so it seemed like that would be a really good fit. Plus, I had been doing public safety, first responder stuff most of my career, and it was related, but not exactly the same. And then I also wanted to work at the airport, which I thought was a great translation of skills from being a park ranger because you're essentially doing hospitality and safety and rules at the same time, very similar,
Ah,
where you want people to
right.
have a good experience, but you also need to sometimes put sidebars on it for safety and for reasons important to other guests and so on. And then the last one was I came to find out about a program locally that worked with folks that were having mental health challenges. It was directing them into the court system because they were facing charges of varying degrees. And a lot of times it started compounding because they would miss court appearances because they were already struggling with these medical issues. And so I got to know about a program, they call them mental health liaisons with the court system, and they were literally removing tens of people out of adjudication and keeping them on track through support, through
Oh,
making sure they
wow.
were keeping track of appearance dates and making sure they were filing paperwork when they needed to and providing that mental health support. And what I really wanted to do was really just volunteer and support that mission because I thought, having been in public safety, having seen so many people, having worked with people having mental health crisis over the years, it just seemed like it was a much more effective and empathetic way to work with that. So that was going to be the three-legged stool, and I started into it. I actually started working for the airport before I left my other job.
Ok, were you when you were doing this, it sounds like some of these jobs were for pay, like you would be making an income, and the other job was looking at it like a volunteer job, and so these are like 3 part-time jobs you were.
Only one of them was I really expecting compensation, and that was the airport. And
Okay,
really, the real compensation for the company I was employed with was free standby flying. Like, the
okay,
hourly wage
okay.
was pretty much volunteer, but that's because they offer the best flight compensation in all of the airlines that are around us anyway. Like, you get paid to literally be around jets all day,
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh.
it's also one of my favorite things about it was that it was customer service. You help people at the counter and so on to work out different kinds of tickets and things like that, but then you also throw baggage, and
Ah,
you, like, haul trash, and
diversity.
you clean the plane. So, similar to being a park ranger, you're doing a lot of physical things and you're doing customer service cognitive things, and so to me, that's a very dream combination. Similarly, in the dog training, you're doing everything outside. It is a very physical thing, but you also are learning basically how to be a dog trainer, as it turns out. Some of those things were really good overlaps for what I already liked. I don't like to be all inside. I pretty much like to be outside, but I also like for things to be mentally kind of good challenges. And I like to be in teams. That was a big part of it. I wanted to be part of teams. So really the airport was the only thing. Everything else to me was really going to be on a volunteer basis. And part of the reason the court mental health court support position needed to be is that it's the same retirement that I'm on, and it's
Okay.
very restrictive about working while you're currently being paid by that retirement system. You have to keep your hours under a certain level.
Very
But
practical. So you had
yeah,
some practical considerations. However, you had a pretty good plan considering that you did have some pretty good information with the overlaps with what you had done before. Now, you didn't do the same kind of informational interview or job shadow kind of stuff you did for your first career, but yet you had enough overlap and experience in work in general that it seemed like a go. So
I don't,
continue
yeah.
on with what did you experience once you implemented your plan?
I knew that we're doing some of these things seemed also like very similar to the people in the park ranger world on the surface. So, started at the airport, and I think overall, the actual job duties I still love. I was in a special position called a cross utilization that kind of got to move around, like I was saying. And I love that. But I was on the lowest of the totem pole schedule wise. I had zero control over my schedule ultimately.
Mm,
And they said it
red
would
flag.
probably be a couple years before I would have enough seniority to really get a schedule that would allow me to do the dog stuff and do family stuff like I really wanted to. That was one of the biggest things with the airport. The other thing that I picked up on was it actually culturally didn't turn out to be a good fit. And I think that there were
Thing.
some people there that I absolutely still to this day have such admiration, and I really enjoyed working, and they were very mission oriented. It seemed like other people that it didn't match for me in a variety of ways, and it got to be to where it was along with the schedule and not being able to do the dog thing that I felt like it was a good time to step away from that and maybe look at returning later. And I did leave on good terms. And they said, in fact, somebody approached me recently, said, "Hey, we have openings again." So ultimately, I was at the airport from March to August, is what it ended up being. There were many things I really loved about it. I miss it to some degree when I hear jets going over and stuff, but I love not having the schedule onus. And I also love not battling some of the cultural things.
And I think what's interesting is you may have shared in your previous discussion of your previous career that you ended up in a management role at the state park where you were a park ranger. And yet here you were starting from the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, not just with schedule, but also with rank and influence and things like that. And so when you talked about like when you were at the park, I imagine as a manager, you had a little more control over what that environment or the culture would be like. And how did it feel being back in a situation where you didn't have that kind of authority and or you didn't experience what you thought you would in the culture?
That's a really good question because as you're even saying it, I'm still like realizing that there's some clicks happening. And I think that it was not an environment where some of the stronger personalities wanted everyone to succeed. And I guess another
Mhm.
word for that is maybe there was clicks. And
Right.
and I'm very goofy at times and aloof, and I'm there for the mission, and I'm there to like help problem solve and do things like that, but I'm definitely not a join in on talking about other people or just things like that. And it started to feel like there was definitely kind of an in and an out crowd. And it's funny because at the beginning of my ranger career, I actually did work in some pretty, I would even call them unprofessional environments. But like you said, I took a lot of notes along the way and realized, hey, if I'm ever in those roles of leadership, it's my job to give everyone every opportunity to succeed. If somebody doesn't
Right.
succeed, I'm going to think, what did I not do first before I even look at that person? Because that was something that I realized wasn't present early on in my career. And so I really wanted to flip that script. And there were a lot of people that showed up and it was a little bit rough, and then they would become convinced that we really wanted their success, and they would start to really thrive. When you really truly understand that people want you to succeed, it can really transform how people go into situations and their thought processes. Not everyone did succeed, but I felt confident at the end of the day that we had done everything we could.
Right, to create the nurturing for this
Right.
person to
And
grow.
sometimes accountability,
Mhm.
it's support and it's also accountability. Accountability is its own kind of support, right? And so it's a
Yes.
combination. And then there were some people that started to succeed so well, they realized that what we were doing wasn't actually their fit, and they would go off and they would move mountains in another place, which I also loved. To me, if you're
Right.
contributing to successful, talented professionals in any field, that's mission delivery. And better
Oh,
that
I
they do
love
it
that.
better they do it where they want to be than then they try and square peg round hole in your world, because ultimately it's just never going to fit. We had a young man who, because we were officers, we were commissioned peace officers, he had become a park ranger because his mom was too afraid of him becoming a cop. And we had struggles, and then he started to really thrive, and then he just said to his mom, I really want to be a cop. From what I've heard, he went to a department and he is just doing fantastic. So the culture of the airport was very cliquish, and there were some very strong personalities that other people would like eyes down when it would start to get goofy, but nobody really addressed it. And I think it's because of everyone on the team, there's 40 people, only 3 are full time and only one really has any
Oh,
kind of supervisory authority. And that's a lot for a single person to try and kind of shape that culturally. And also that all we changed that person while I was there. So anyway, schedule, culture, it just ended up being a better thing for me to step back from. And I had already started on the dog thing. I had purchased my first full bred AKC dog, as we've had shelter dogs our whole life,
right.
because I was told by the first person that I was sent to when I asked around who could help me get into this search dog work. She said, these are the only 5 breeds you should look at, and you should only get a full breed. You should never look at a shelter or a mixed breed dog anyway. So I'm kind of following the rules because that is what I've traditionally done. And it's, by the way, gotten me into trouble in the past. Sometimes rules are good to push back on. And I wish that I had, because I had a pet dog that I wanted to use that in retrospect, I think we would have been certified very quickly. And I think she would have
Interesting.
loved it. But anyway,
Interesting.
with what I knew at the time, I purchased this great dog and started into the process, had an original mentor, very supportive at first, brought another person into our kind of small group that she started mentoring. And all of a sudden she and I weren't communicating really well. So I pivoted to another mentor who was and is fantastic, but she was in another state. And so I was driving to
Mm.
another state at least a couple times a month with my new young dog. And we were going through the hoops and a lot of good things on. I mean, I saw places, did things, got to help search for people, not with my dog, but as a flanker, really had some amazing enriching. And there were a couple other people that also were training dogs, and they were really positive, great people to be around. So get to where my dog is about a year and a half old, and we go through a test and we pass. To be honest, I don't know that we should have. I think because the evaluator had the same exact breed from the same exact kennel, there might have been a little
Oh,
bias
this is
there.
a small world, isn't
It
it?
is a small world and it's all volunteers. I think he's a rock star, and he basically, like the mentor at the time said, it's like getting permission to get better is what he's given you. By
Mm.
certifying you and your dog, now you can get further along and you can now participate in things that you couldn't before. So we do about 2 to 3 months more of training, and then that great mentor says, you need to wash this dog, who now was
Mhm.
almost 2 years old.
Wow.
And I could go into the details, but needless to say, he and I had traveled thousands of miles together. We'd been on helicopters and airplanes and in lava fields and in canyons, and
Oh,
we had
wow.
really gone deep as a team. And he's good at searching, but his breed and his general demeanor is that when he gets really hot or when he gets bored, to be honest, he will lose focus. And in the type of search work we were doing, sometimes there were police involved and things like that. And a, a dog that is more like kind of what people almost think of as neurotic, those really intense, like a border collie Malinois,
Mhm.
those dogs can really stay on focus. And even through heat and other things, you almost have to pull them back. And he was the opposite. So I really came to this crossroads of, as I told one of the people that I had trained with in another area of Colorado, they asked how it was going. And I said, I either have to get a different dog or the dog and I have to get a different discipline.
So when you say wash the dog, you're not talking about, like, destroying the dog, talking
No, no,
about it
no. I'm sorry.
you're
Of the
making sure everybody
church.
knows that he's
Yeah.
not really qualified for that kind of work, is
And
basically
I
like a
really
human.
trust that this mentor,
Right.
she really wanted our success, but she
Yes.
ultimately wanted to also keep the level of the team that we were on and the search process at a level that was very high and professional. And I absolutely support that.
Right.
So when I found out that this dog and I could not continue in that type of search work, I originally was looking for another working position he could go to, like as a service animal or so on. But my family, at this point, he's one of us, and they push back a
Right.
lot, and so my original plan was I'm just gonna take a pause and figure out what my plan is, and then it went on long enough to where I just formally stepped back from the search work. And again, like the airport, some of it I loved, and maybe it could be something in the future, but I also, when I step back from all that traveling and all that intense focus, you
Right.
have to document everything that you do every day with the dog. I realized that I had really shrunk my life into a very small space of dog search, and everything else was having to fit around it.
Well, let me
And
ask you this. It was a volunteer position, but it
yes,
sounds to me like there was some financial commitment involved with this
it,
whole thing as well.
it was
So you
thousands
picked
and thousands
you
of
know,
dollars.
a passion or whatever, thousands and thousands of dollars, which you might have been prepared for some of that, but it sounds to me like that added up as well. And then also the flexibility, being
Yeah.
able to do the family and other things. Because as we step back for a moment, we're talking about retirement. Yeah. And then this
Well,
is
it was more consuming almost than my original full-time job,
And
for
that's what
sure.
it's starting to sound
Yeah,
like.
yeah. And I didn't have anybody close geographically that I could work with on a routine basis. All of my support was coming from pretty far away. In fact, had I gotten another dog, my plan was to actually look at maybe renting an apartment.
The other state,
Right, so that I could
right?
really intensely
This
with
is a
connect.
commitment
Yeah.
and a
And my husband and
passion.
I had already said that we have made a cardinal rule because we had both been asked to consider promoting to places, but we would have had to be in two different places. And we made the commitment to each other that we would not do that for any reason. So, anyway, so the dog thing got put on pause. And in the
Pause.
midst of both of those things, I found out the courts literally had no way to bring on a volunteer. It just, the process doesn't exist.
Oh, right?
So, my three legged stool became a stool with no legs. So, it was,
Oh, so tell me how, because 'cause you're talking casually about this now, but I
yes.
know at the time, can you share any, like, real feelings to other people that might be thinking they had it all figured out, they're retired now, maybe they're in the middle of something like what you're describing and they're caught up in the momentum, but how did it really feel when you realized first one leg, then the second one, then the third? Your plans did not come through on the level at which you thought they would. And by the way, you went right into you
Mhm.
retired and then you went right into the airport, correct?
They were
Time
overlapped from March to
right.
June, they were overlapped.
So that's another factor that you didn't really have any time to soak in the concept of retirement. You just basically wanted to get going, and your husband did the same thing. He got a job right away that is full time. So tell me more about how you felt at the airport when things didn't seem to come through, because that sounds like something that you were really having your heart set on for a while.
Both the airport and the dog searching had
Right.
been in my mind for, I would say, maybe a decade, to be honest.
Wow.
They were that firmly entrenched,
Interesting.
um, and so it felt like failure. I mean, especially when I put the two things together, the common element was me. And it's hard because
Oh.
when I try and practice what I preach in terms of self-awareness, a lot of times you'll have somebody who's, yeah, but it's because of this, and yet they're having similar things go on all around them, and you're like, are you not realizing that it's the same thing every time as that you're in it, kind of thing. So
You're the main common denominator.
right. So I was trying to be self-aware and not lose an opportunity to go, like, because I had such great success and abundance professionally that it was like maybe I had huge blind spots that I was not aware of.
Oh,
And
interesting. You started
and I
questioning
do,
even your previous profession, which you seem to feel like was a dream
yeah, like
profession.
maybe
That's
I was
interesting.
able to do it well because I wasn't in similar challenges and I just didn't even realize it. And I will say, to own things fully, one of the challenges for me for a long time has been detail orientation. And one of the people that I worked with for a long time that was really tough on and off, one of the times said, not being detail oriented is a luxury. And that really stuck with me because I would sometimes use that luxury because when you lead a team, then you're not oftentimes the person who has to figure out how long is that board, right? Like you just go, oh, a board's a great idea. I support that. What do you need? So
Right?
I think that was part of the challenge, not at the airport, because the airport, like everything there's clicked in terms of, the work. But the dog stuff, there was so much more detail. And with dog training, the documentation, and then also the timing when you're working with dogs to make the connection in the dog's mind, the timing is like it's the make it or break it. And my timing was not always there. And that's what my primary mentor started to be kind of more and more harsh about was like she would just in disgust roll her eyes and turn
Ah,
away if my timing wasn't there. Those kind of things, those are the details of being successful in that role. And I think that that was one
interesting.
thing I will own. But and I started getting a little bit more like insecure too because things were not going. I thought I'd click in and things would go really well in both of those worlds. And then when they didn't, I was like, okay, now, and so then I started to let it, I think, compile on itself of now I don't feel secure and things aren't going well and it must be me. And when I walked away from the airport, I had good reasons, but I also internally really did think this is failure because you had this plan for a long
Wow.
time. There's a lot of things that were a good fit still. And then when the dog thing and the between the two
Wow.
was about, I'd say 14 months maybe, I had a lot to distract me. My youngest kid joining the military, my next youngest kid being in college, my mom having a lot of medical issues when she had some surgery. I took time out for that. So it was one of these things where I was processing it, but also functioning just superficially a lot along the way. But yeah, when I added both of those things up, it definitely felt like at least the retirement plan had failed. And I think what I have started to process and come around to is that, like a lot of things, like relationships that I really wanted to work out and then they didn't. And in retrospect,
Right.
I was like, oh my gosh, I dodged a huge bullet.
Yeah.
I do think that the things that now I am able to do, I couldn't have done with either one of those in place. So I am trying to think what was valuable, what could I still pursue or take away from it. I've mentored a lot of people in pet dog management because what I learned doing working dogs, and I will make this strong plug for everybody with a pet dog, is that the working dog model helps very high strung dogs become better pets. And
Oh,
so if you
interesting.
can simulate what people do with those working dogs at a level that's manageable as a pet owner, the amount of transformation in your dog's day-to-day life is profound because I had a very neurotic older dog that I then started bringing all these practices in with, and she would have been a phenomenal search dog. She's too old now, but had I used her like I wanted to and had I not been given that one-sided mentoring right away, but also just using it on her with her as a pet, I will hide things for her, and she is rock star level at finding him. When you let a dog search, because that's what it does to feed itself historically, they use cognitive energy as well as physical energy because they have to
Huh.
figure out wind and depth and height and all of the things. Heat even changes. Heat and cold change the way odor moves. Obstacles, if an odor is being blown by a wind, it'll get caught if there's an obstacle there. So the dog has to cognitively sort all that out, and it uses a lot of their energy. So I've mentored a lot of pet owners with create these complex problems for your dog over time, and it will be. And some people are like, I've always wanted to go mushroom hunting. Do you think I could teach my dog to find mushrooms? I'm like, you can teach a dog to find anything. You can teach a dog to know when someone's going to have a seizure, when somebody's diabetic, when there are narcotics, when there are explosives. Like dogs, their olfactory skills are so huge. They just need to make the association that their reward comes from finding that thing, and they'll be on it. So it's a cool process, it's a cool program, and that is one of the weird offshoots is helping people who have dogs that they feel are overwhelming and saying it's a huge amount of commitment on your part, but if you start building it, it becomes less day-to-day work because the dog starts putting it all together. So that's one of the weird offshoots that I've gotten out of it. And I even have thought that if I were really into it, you could start a dog training business that had olfactory searching as one of the ways that you mentored pet owners. And I think you would see huge amounts of transformation with dogs because obedience, agility, socializing, those are all like the key for any dog. But if you add search to it, it's like that next level of treating your dog as a more complex creature, right?
But I wanna say something, as you were sharing your experience with sharing some of your working dog techniques with pet owners and everything, I could just see your confidence was there, your excitement, your enthusiasm, and so being an entrepreneur myself, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you love something, if you're enjoying it, then finding a way that works for you and the people around you, and any business that I've been involved with, it's I'm giving something of value and people are paying me what they think that's worth. And so it's just a matter of finding those matches of people that want to take their dogs to that bigger level, which I would be a customer for sure.
And that's the
Anyway.
thing, right? When you and I were younger, pets were more backyards. A lot of times, even they were tied to things. I think culturally, at least in our kind of world, the way that people interact, and actually, truthfully, on some of the stuff, agility and obedience, I don't know if you've seen it, but on the internet, you can do it with rabbits, you can do it with cats,
I
frankly,
didn't know that.
and they'll be on it. So it's a cool process. I think
Wow.
olfactory wise, every animal has its own way that it's put together that makes it ideal as a predator, or to help survival and prey. But they all can learn obedience, agility, socializing. Like that is actually something that is very transferable. But anyway, yeah, I do think sometimes I'm coming out of the disappointment, like the
Right. Still
backdraft.
coming out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And trying to like do it only when it shows up organically and I feel like it's somebody who's going to be open to the information and things like that. But it is funny because I thought about suggesting it to one of the local dog daycare kennel places. And in the meantime, my favorite local trainer, I was sending everybody to get like formal training. She and that kennel have teamed up, which I was
Oh,
already thinking if she and this other woman, Elaine, who works a lot with livestock guardian dogs and protection dogs, if
right.
these two people and this place, because the place is very unique culture with the owner being very focused on dog success and happiness. I'm like, if things came together, you could have this amazing facility. In the meantime, two of them did. So it was
Nice.
funny that I was like, oh, this stuff can just happen because it's the right thing. But so anyway, so in the meantime, I did get involved in a couple other things, and some of those have been really enjoyable. I'm on the board of a couple of nonprofits. One of them is basically all about getting kids outside to restore their mental and physical resilience. And the other
Wow.
one is to support the state park that I used to work at. And it's a friends group. And then I also got a part time job doing basically grunt work at a mechanic's shop. And
Aha.
so I've done everything from change out ballast to seal cracks in parking lots to haul metal to the scrap yard. It's
Oh,
been
wow.
extremely diverse. It's very tangible. Like I see something and then I apply the things that my boss has asked me to, and then it's transformed in the way that he needs. And so it's very satisfying in the sense of it's not about necessarily the people side. It's all about this needs to be physically done and now it's done and I can see it. And it's so it's been, and the diversity has been really interesting too of skills and stuff. So I've been doing those things, and there's things I really like about it. I think where I'm kind of trying to really process things is I fell into those. So I'm trying to decide if it's provided a safety net and that's what I appreciate about it, or if it's because these are really things that I am like invested in and I want to continue. Certainly all three of the missions are valuable. Seeing people's cars get turned back around to them because I'm supporting the mechanics that can do that part of it is really cool. But I think that's where I'm at now. Are these things I really want to do, or are they things that I ended up doing that are interesting enough and I'm engaged in them? That's where I'm at now. And I think one of the things that I would appreciate if I would have maybe heard something like this going into it is that plans can be altered. And sometimes they feel like failure. And though it may be because I honestly believe, especially with the dog thing, that if we had not hit that wall, I would still be fully consumed 50, 60 hours a week
Wow.
potentially. And so,
Unexpected gift in a way from what
yeah,
you're
like it at least
saying.
gave me an opportunity to see it in a more realistic way. And I think, like you talked about, if I had done ride alongs with the airport, and if I and asked more about the schedule and asked more about, because the other thing is, and I don't want to blow the myth of standby flying, but it is no easy task. Sometimes you end up having to go to very strange places to make those dots connect and they still don't work. And when you're new into the work, then you also are on that seniority as a standby flyer. So I'll be third or fourth when I'm waiting at the Denver airport, and then all of a sudden I'm like 33rd because a bunch of other employees with higher seniority than me have decided they want to take that plane too. So
Wow.
it's a very it's some people thrive on that, by the way. It's like you being an entrepreneur. Like that would have scared me to death personally. Some people thrive on it. They're like, "Yeah, I had to go through Anchorage to get to Germany or something." And you're like, "Okay,
I
that
see what you're
sounds
saying.
terrifying."
And of course, when you have family members, I think you were one
Oh,
time.
yeah. Yeah, like
Not all
they're
members are
like, "What do
into
you
it.
mean we don't just put our name down and get on a plane and go where we're going?" Coming back from the graduation in San Francisco, we ended up having to go through Tucson and almost didn't get out of Tucson. It was very precarious, and the family member with me was like, "I don't like this." We've been paying for our tickets since then,
So
but
so this is the funny thing is that we don't know what we don't know. And one of the things that I'm hearing loud and clear from your experience and the fact that you're smiling right now is the fact that you can't do it wrong. This concept of maybe you can, don't get stressed out if things don't line up the way you think that they're going to. I imagine that could go personally at home as well. Maybe they have a spouse that's already home and the other spouse likes being on their own and now they've got another person there. I mean, this doesn't sound like your scenario, but do you know what I'm saying? First of all, let me go back for a minute though, because all I'm hearing from what you've shared so far about your three legged stool is the fact that you didn't have all the information. You also didn't know until you were in the environment what some of your values were. You didn't understand that at this time in your life, you'd like to be more flexible with your time in order to be visiting family members, be part of your kids' life, that kind of thing. And so there's so many things that you couldn't have known, in other words, had you not gone and tried it. And the one thing I'm hearing that's the tough part is when you align your identity and who you are and your value to these plans, that sounds like the
mhm,
hook to me
that's what I was gonna
that
say. Yeah.
go ahead.
It's just that's the ego. That's the ego side
Ah.
is I literally still occasionally run into people that go, "Are you still at the airport?" And it's been a year. since I was there at least. And it's still at times hard for me to be like, "No, it didn't work out. How's the dog thing?" That didn't work. So the ego part of it is one of the tougher things, and it's been hard for me even to not at times take it away, especially, and I'll say Dave and I, my husband and I, we both were passionate about our primary careers, and both of us identified strongly with them, and our kids were very involved in our careers. It was all meshed together, and he's moved into something that's very related, and he's had overall great success, and he's doing awesome, which is I love.
Mm.
That's fantastic. And though, because I have had such a different experience, that kind of also was for the first time we were in opposing situations in terms of,
Ah,
and to be honest, even I had gone higher in my previous career than he had, and there was a lot of prestige that kind of flowed over both of us because of that. And so it's been like our family identity has shifted as well to some degree.
interesting.
So I think
Interesting.
that's one of the ego is one thing I wanted to bring up, that um I didn't pick the things that I picked because I thought they were cool. I picked them because I was very interested in them for specific reasons, but they were also cool. And I think that when people are like, "Oh, why don't you start a garden?" I'm like, "Oh my god. Just go ahead and just put me in the home already," right? Like, I have to be careful that my by the way, my daughter is huge into plants now, and she's got, like, a ton of them. And I realized she's creating a botanic gardens in her house, and I'm like, "That's cool. I didn't know you could do that with plants." But anyway, the ego is one. The other thing is the research. When I was getting into the original career, I did all those ride-alongs. I did those, and that's very supported culturally. Everybody knows you're supposed to be doing that. Now, luckily, I had you as a resource to say, "Here's the things you can do." But also, it was like people expect calls from people coming out of college soon. And the thing is, I don't think that is a thing in retirement, and it should be. And I've
Ah,
actually thought
interesting.
retirement mentors or retirement models would be great. I had every people tell me, "Make sure you have things in place because it's really hard to just be at home," to people who are like, "Don't commit to anything for a year." Nothing. And so it's really funny that I think it really can, both of those can be a good fit for different people. But the bottom line is that it's diving deep enough before you make those decisions to know, yeah, this looks more and more like a good fit versus this is moving further and further away. And so I do think that's something we should have. People coming into retirement should be able to do ride alongs and interns and things like that, even in a volunteer capacity. I had a friend who is a huge quilter, and her quilts are like art, but the local quilting group was the culture was not something she could be in. And I think it's just one of those things where you have to learn a lot about something, because I had put a lot of my ego and identity into these things before I got that information. And I do think that made it harder. So, what I would say is, you said you can't do it wrong. I think I did it long, is maybe the way I would put
That's
it.
interesting.
Yeah,
What
because
a way to put it. Instead of
yeah,
I'm doing it wrong, it's like I did it long, and it would have been more fun. It sounds like you when you look back, had you been able to do some of these
treated it
additional
that way. Treated it like a
right.
screening, just like I did at the very beginning, right? Like, it's a double way screening, them on me, but also me on it. And not just go, this has got to be a fit. This is what I'm supposed to be doing because I've been thinking about it for a decade or whatever. And it's very much like a relationship. You put a lot into it, and then you're like, this has got to work out. Yeah, I would say those are some of the things. And then now sorting out the when things organically come up, and I am getting a lot of good feedback. I've had a few humbling experiences in my other positions, but again, I feel like I need to almost start viewing him in that way. Like, is this where I'm at
Right.
my happiest? Is this where I feel
Mhm.
like, and I still am willing to say there's things I don't do well that if I really want to be in this place,
Right.
I will work
The
on.
detail, the
Yeah, exactly, the
mhm.
detail orientation being one of them. So, I think that's where, and I will say also, I have the grace of a great retirement, both my husband and
Tell
I.
me, yeah, and before you go on to that, I wanted to say a couple things. Number 1 is it's interesting how when you were talking earlier when you were a manager and you had people working with you that found out that it wasn't a good fit to be in the park service, it wasn't like they were failing. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just
Yeah,
interesting how that when we apply it to ourselves, we don't always use the same criteria. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
it's supposed to be a fit. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and then the other thing is I've heard from someone else that we both know the concept of relevance. You've had this career, it's been semi prestigious or whatever, it's even impacted your family, and now suddenly you're having issues because somebody's being clicky at work and you're not like you don't have this kind of respect coming towards you without the authority that you used to have, and that then you started taking it personally and gathering evidence that you were a failure or that you were doing failure oriented work. And then finally, when you look back on it, it's like, well, that really wasn't a fit for these reasons as well, including the perk with the airport. It
Applying that
just,
concept to myself of if it wasn't a fit, it doesn't mean it's failure. I agree with that. I hadn't really processed that before that. It's
that it can be a
it's
positive. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is this concept of dropping the judge. If you try it, you find out it's not a fit, and then you tell people, "You know what? Your organization, your purpose here and mission is really critical. It's helping a lot of people. It just doesn't fit for me with what I wanna do." And the other piece being, I wanna know before we talk about the financial piece, because I bet that's a huge piece, is I wanna know if you feel okay not being so active. Do you know if going to visit relatives reminds me of gardening and you're like, you know what I mean? It's is that enough of a reason? Like, have you been able to gain some perspective and appreciation for your ability to go visit your son in the military when you need to? You know what I'm saying? And is it affecting other things that you're looking at now, this newfound freedom that you have and not feeling guilty about it, I guess. This is a complicated question, but I'm trying to get a feel for how have you processed this idea of not being busy 40 hours a week?
I think the I would say busy when you were first talking 100%. I will be honest, and I think maybe because I was a female in a male dominated environment, I feel still a hesitation to slide into something that is quote unquote traditionally feminine, which would be in this case being the more available to the family. I used to joke that Dave was the one that everybody at the schools knew because the schedule he was on for work made it to where he dropped the kids off most of the time. And so all the other parents that drop kids off, Dave knew them. And there's a part of me that's okay, it's a little bit of a role reversal, and I'm okay with that. But that being said, I have realized that, and this is very cliche, both my kids, well, everybody, including my good friends, I would say those are fleeting moments. And it is sometimes more and more apparent to me that if I get opportunities to spend time with people and not have something that I am mentally still letting pull me away or physically pull me away, that's a huge gift. And
Wow.
I do want to take those, and especially because with, kiddos who are young adults, it could be at any moment that their lives change in a way that's so consuming that I may not really have an opportunity to see them much at all. And I've been surprised at how much I have been able to, and also how much they would like me to. So I'm trying to really grab that and run. And I think the same goes with my mom and my siblings and some of my friends as well. And so I think that, and to be honest, the person it's hardest for me to see a lot of times is my husband because his job is all
Mhm.
consuming, especially at this time of year. But even when he's not doing the stuff that he does in the summer, he works 12-hour shifts,
Oh,
which
wow.
by the time you add getting ready for that and then changing when you get, so that's been the ironic part is even though we're quote unquote empty nesters, I spend more time in interactions with people other than him a lot. And especially with the nonprofits and with the kids and stuff. what's hard again because of I think sometimes the gender oriented stuff is when people would ask me what I did for a living, it was something that was like had some weight to it. And it
Mhm.
was like, even if people really didn't understand it, they could tell, oh, that's responsibility and leadership and things like that. And I think it's like driving a minivan versus driving a Camaro, right? Like people interact with you differently. And I think that's ego again. And I just, when I say I got to fly out and hang out with my son who's in the military, I've gotten to a point where I don't really care. Or I get to go to a concert with my daughter, or I'm hanging out with my grandson. Those are things where I just honestly have more and more just decided if other people don't think that has importance or value, then I don't really care about that. I do think that I still sometimes would love to have something to drop in there that's like, oh, but I'm also pulling drowning horses out of the sea in my free time or whatever, really out there.
I see
But
what you're saying.
yeah, I think that if something that has that kind of mission importance to me comes up, then I'm available for it. And I still wouldn't say that forever that the airport and the dog search stuff is out. I just think the current manifestations as they have shown up are not a good fit. The other thing is I was really only going to do most of that kind of stuff until my husband quote retire
Right.
because when he retires, he doesn't want to do anything else. He's made that really
Right.
clear.
I see what
So
you're
I
saying. So
thought
you have a
this is my
window.
chance to
Right.
all this energy that I've had coiled up towards this stuff out. And then when he retires, then we can really like gallivant around because we love to do that. And it is now that I am just more in that capacity earlier than what I had planned on. And there's a part of me that almost dreads something really cool showing up because then it'll be like,
Be
then is he going to be waiting on me then? Like I'm waiting on him. So I don't have the end of the story or the even the like real clear snapshot, but I do feel like there's some things that I've taken away that I'm going to run with for now, be ready to alter if I need to, and I really think I will deep dive a lot more than I did if I think, ooh, that's the thing. I wouldn't have even been available if I hadn't had all these other things not go as planned. But before I jump into it, because people would sometimes think they wanted to be park rangers and then they find out park ranger work is a lot of people management. It's not walking trails and looking through binoculars, a lot of it. Biologists do that, and there's positions in natural resources do that, but park rangers are really about people. And so they would get in there and find out that there was a lot of people work and be like, "Well, I don't." And that was that part of me was like, did you not look into this at all before you got here? So I don't want to be that person in my next evolution again. So I'm going to
It's
try
funny.
and do it.
It's funny you mention that because you and I know this other younger woman who's going through a transition right now, and she had been working as one of these biologists with the binoculars looking at the eagles and everything, and cracked me up. The reason why she left the field was actually because you had to bunk with 6 other people in the wilderness, and you didn't have your own place. I mean, it was such a funny reason, but it's like it was not sustainable for her. And although she
It's a
liked
huge
it to work,
compromise.
that's a funny thing. Yeah, your
Yeah.
day to day, and you don't have your own room. You don't have your for
Yeah.
these long stretches. And it's so funny. But like you say, and that goes back to find out what's really involved, including like myself at one point going into being a stay at home mom when everybody around me and I had my master's in project management and everything else and had been in tech. And I was like, you know what? I think the best thing for my family is this. And that's how we started building this company. And so it's so funny that, and I was super happy. Try not to feel too guilty, even though, like you said, it's not a role that was necessarily encouraged by other people in
Our
my past.
the modeling was the dad in my situation was all about the profession. That was
Exactly. Same
100% the
here.
identity.
Same
And then the
here.
mom in the situation became all about the profession by necessity because that's how they paid bills. And also, we're passionate, worked with young children, and we're passionate about it. So I think that the modeling that we have oftentimes also goes, oh, so that's how this is supposed to look. And I do think it's important probably to also reflect that some of what I get hung up on the ego is that I have felt that profession and family, like you can secretly have a super great family and be very passionate about it, but what goes forward is what's your profession, right? And I
Right.
think that's a
The big
tough
pressure
thing. Yeah, because
for
I actually
women.
feel like the blend that I had was perfect. It worked great. I'm really glad that our kids got to see us model how much we loved what we got paid to do. And so I love that. But also, I feel like it would be okay to have equal pride about the fact that I do get to drop everything and go and help my daughter move apartments or help my son move houses or whatever. So, yeah, I think those are things that I still have to like navigate.
Right, you're still in process and learning. It sounds to me like no matter what, you have continued to learn on so
Yeah.
many different levels inside and outside in the physical world. And I know we could have a whole discussion just on this, but maybe we could couch it in like some takeaways here. But the finances, if you could touch just briefly on how important is it before you retire? Because you're able to make these choices. Do I do volunteer? Do I do paid work? I mean, because of some other choices that were made years ago. And so, how important is it? And how did you manage that in such a way that you had the security, the feeling of security before you, quote, retired and left your previous profession, that you could actually do this?
Yeah, that's the key. And financial insecurity, like early in my career and my husband's and early in our marriage, there was definitely some of that. But we both got to an income, and not we are definitely not like wealthy. Let me make that clear. But we became financially secure enough to where we weren't worried. We weren't paycheck to paycheck. We were able to pay off a lot of debt in addition to having a very secure job, which financial security is something I have a huge amount of aversion to. And so working for the government is a pretty good deal because it's unlikely that the government's going to go away. So I felt very lucky. I will say there was a couple times when there were huge budget cuts that I would have potentially had to relocate to keep my job and things like that. So it wasn't
Right.
always like just perfect. But the other thing is that because we both worked for the state, we got a defined benefit retirement, which means that it's a certain amount every month.
Oh,
And it's indexed in certain ways to cost of living things. So over time, it is not fixed. And so that's like the huge gift in all of this is a lot of retirements are now defined contribution and then it's more like an investment and you need to know how to manage it. In our case, it's a defined benefit where somebody else manages it and we know what's coming each month. And that is just a huge gift because I think we would have figured out how to navigate it had we been in a different kind of retirement plan. But I'm certainly very grateful that there's people who professionally do financial management dealing with the money that then helps pay. And my mom is also on the same defined benefit retirement. Hers is not quite as high percentage wise because she didn't do as many years, but it has that same advantage of being a defined amount and being indexed over time. But the other thing I will throw out there is, and this is again something I want to thank you for, is that some of the big things that I learned early on are, for instance, unsecured debt is a big no no because if something happens to your income, you need to be able to give back whatever it is that you financed in order to not end up being debt poor. And so we would oftentimes prioritize paying off debt anytime that we had extra funds. So we also, by the time Dave quote unquote retires again,
Mhm.
will be essentially debt free by everything we can see now. So everything that income wise that comes to us after that will be really to live on and make sure that we're
Wonderful.
investing and having a little bit of mentoring along the way about some of those big picture financial strategies is huge. And then the other thing is Dave and I are inherently on each other's side. It's very rare that we don't also 100% want each other's success. And if we
Ah,
have a misstep communication wise, we'll give each other the benefit of the doubt. Like, that's weird. That sounded like a jerk thing, but I know this person. They wouldn't say a jerk thing. And that has been
wow,
immensely helpful.
communication.
So that having the financial security and the relationship security to go into all of these weird retirement adventures, I think has been hugely important. And I get a lot of good support in general from some friends and family and things like that. And so it all adds up to, if you have missteps, having some of those other support systems
Bottom
is like,
lines,
yeah, the dog
right.
searching, if I hadn't had some of the financial options that I did, there's no way. The dog searching was immensely taxing, time, money, certainly mentally, all those kind of things.
Right, and so what I'm hearing is that some of the reason why you have as good of a retirement as you have now, as much happiness in general, is because of the fact that you made decisions 20, 30 years ago
Hmm.
that actually, and you knew yourself and your husband that you didn't wanna end up with some lump sum at the end that you had to deal with and try to figure out how to invest, that you wanted to be working within an environment where you could have a set amount of reliable income coming in every month. So that was something you knew years ago was a benefit to you.
I think I would have stayed in the profession regardless because I loved it.
Right, right, that's
But
a good point.
I think that being that is not something I was, honestly, if somebody had given me the same amount of money as I put into this retirement over the years and I were a financial guru, I probably could have been triple, right?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I get
But
that. I
the
see what you're saying.
reality
So you
is that,
exchange some security for
right,
some upside.
exactly.
Yeah, so that's
Exactly.
part of the reality, but for
Yes.
you, you didn't want to risk it. Here
Correct.
you are, you're a commissioned officer with a gun going to work, having to deal your husband as
Yeah.
well, and you're willing to take life and death types of risks, but you weren't
Right.
willing to take
But
the kind of
not,
financial risks that I might have taken, for instance,
that
you
is
know?
exactly right. That is
But you know
precisely
yourself.
it.
But you knew
Yeah.
yourself early on,
Yes.
and the other thing that's interesting is, like you said, although both of us have been in and out of relationships that weren't a good fit, that we found out that you try to make it work and it's like, okay, it's just not a good fit. But the fact that you were aware of what's important to you in a partnership, like it's a real partnership. Being in a marriage and somebody you want to grow old with, quote unquote. I heard something years ago that people put less thought into who they marry than they do into buying a car. And the fact is that when you've had a few experiences, it's like, wait a minute, what are my real values? What are my underlying desires and criteria? And I'll tell you, I agree with this. Being with somebody who's truly in your corner that wants to see you do
Mhm.
well,
Yeah.
not competing, that is willing to pick up the slack when things aren't going as well for you and vice versa, and that assumes that all is well, and if something comes up, it's a communication thing instead of a look what this guy did to me. Mindset is a very different, like you said, it makes so much more possible. Like 1 + 1 = 10 when you're in
Mhm.
a situation like that, which I'm in myself today as well with a partner who's like that. And then you get on the same page. And what's nice is early on in that relationship, you find out how do you manage money? How do I manage money? You find this out before marriage, you might be in better shape because one person might be like, I'm going to risk it all. I'm going to roll the dice. And this is the way it is. This is my life. The other person is stop. And so these are the subtle things that when you get to retirement, you're like, hey, and as your husband said, when he's done with his career, he wants to be done, period, and go have fun and play. And so those are things that you discuss as well. So you don't end up in a situation where it's like, wait a minute, I'm ready to go on a sailboat around the world for a year. And you still want to go train people. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So these are some things. Is there anything else? Because it sounds like that really you are having a pretty happy retirement, though you're going through the emotional pieces that it's taking to actually have that full abundance.
Yeah, I
The
think
learning.
I tell people I consider it more like a retirement adventure. Like,
Ah,
and adventures are always a double-edged thing. Generally, I'm pro adventure. I don't like to know exactly what's coming, and I don't like monotony and things like that. I also wouldn't have picked this adventure necessarily, and so that part of it is, I think it's a courage thing almost. I don't wanna be dramatic, "Oh, I have to be so courageous," but quite honestly, when, like, we talked about how you define yourself is very intertwined with some of this stuff, it takes, I think, courage to say, I am going to step away from some of that, or I am going to let other people have whatever. Because I come from a public safety kind of background, and there's definitely a culture, and people have done a variety of things. Some people became river guides, some people. But what I noticed is that 5 years out, we really, unless you're close to somebody, you really don't have any idea what they're doing, and the people that you don't even care because it's just the people that you're invested in. So I think those are some of the probably lead takeaways. And on the relationship front, I was going to say too that when on the surface, when Dave and I met, it was like we met professionally. He was patrolling in the park that I worked in and stuff. And I was like, what's up with this guy? And on the surface, like our interests did not overlap. I was an outdoorsy
Interesting.
hiker, blah, blah, blah. He was more of like a urban baseball loving. And so similar, like what something appears on the surface. And then when you get into, I used to have kind of litmus tests. Do I think I could get through this kind of hurdle with this person? And it wasn't until Dave came along that I thought, wow, if we really got dealt something very tough, and we did in ways along the way, but pretty early on that happened. And I was just blown away at how much he was inexhaustible in his support of me. Other people would have been like, are you over that yet? What's going on? And he, not one time did he ever have any judgment or criticism of me about that I needed to deal with things the way I need to deal with. And I think that those are the things where I've learned to love baseball. We now have a very kind of schmancy camper in the middle on that. I go climb 14ers with other people. He likes to go and do other stuff too. So it's a lot of, again, what you see on the surface of a career, of a person, or of a town, or of a whatever, fill in the blank. I think it's that deeper dive and that real understanding of the culture of the relationship and stuff that then you realize, oh, if I have to get through an adventurous retirement, I'm glad it's going to be with this person because they'll have my back.
Oh, wow. That's so wonderful, and I'd be excited in the future we can maybe talk more about relationships or leadership because it sounds like that's like a really heartfelt spot for you as well.
Super passionate about that,
Yeah.
as is Dave. And I think, yeah, we both have been through leadership training. And it's funny because it's all about what you take away and actually do. And yeah.
That's exciting, and I hope we can come back a few months from now and check in and see how the retirement is going as well.
Let's see what the next evolution of the adventure is. I and if anybody else is struggling, maybe we could start support groups of people whose retirement did not go according to plan but are totally up for going to that next evolution. So,
Oh, that sounds fantastic and highly practical. It's a thing. It could be a new direction.
that's right.
Anyway,
That's
I
right.
I really wanna thank you for your time. It's a pleasure talking with you and an honor, and I just really I really appreciate learning what you have to share today for my own life as well. Do you have a place where people can contact you on LinkedIn or anything in case something comes up where people are wanting to talk
Sure.
more about this dog area or talking about retirement or talking about leadership?
Sure. I am on LinkedIn at Kirstin Copeland. I'm also on Alignable now, which is for a couple of the nonprofit. But I am very open to it. I love to have a community around this type of stuff because it can feel isolating at times.
That sounds fantastic. And I'll make sure that we post those in the notes as well as on the screen. So thanks, Kristen.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you.
wonderful. Have a
This is
wonderful
great.
weekend.
Thank you.